Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Piers Bocock, and I'm one of the resources lucky enough to work for the USAID IDEAL activity. I'd like to welcome you to this session on learning about HDP coherence from backbone mechanisms. This session is part of the larger knowledge sharing series and its third thematic area, communication and coordination for coherence. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping notes. First, we'd like to inform you that this session will be recorded and that we are providing interpretation in French as well. So please, I'd like to invite everyone to select their preferred language for this session. You can do so by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting either English or French. You can choose to mute the original audio or listen to it at a lower volume. Second, I want to strongly encourage everyone to make use of the chat feature in Zoom throughout this session. At any time during the event, if you have questions or comments, please use the chat box feature to share your thoughts or jump into the virtual conversation. We will be capturing some of your questions to feature during the discussion portion of this session. Third, I want to encourage everyone to stick around until the end of the session when we will be posting links to some helpful resources in the chat. As a reminder, we opened the knowledge sharing series in June, and we are now on thematic area 3, communication and coordination for coherence, with events yesterday and today. In a moment, I will turn the proverbial microphone over to our moderator for today, but first I want to give you a preview of the session. First, our moderator will do a little bit of stage setting about the session and why we think there may be important lessons to be learned from so-called backbone mechanisms that could apply to other partners and activities who are also focusing on the HDP nexus. Then she will introduce our panelists for today and ask them some prompting questions about their experience with HDP coherence, as what they're learning, how they're adapting, and what lessons they would like to share. Then they will engage in a bit of a conversation before we open the floor to questions, observations, and reflections from you, the audience. I hope that sounds good to all of you. It certainly feels promising to me. With all that said, it is my great pleasure to introduce this session's moderator, Karine Garnier. Karine is a knowledge management and organizational learning advisor in USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, serving as the activity manager for the USAID IDEAL activity and a member of the Applied Learning Team in BHA's Office of Technical and Program Quality since 2019. I've had the honor of working with Karine for a number of years, and it's always great to do so. So, Karine, it is my pleasure to welcome you and to hand you the floor.
Thank you so much, Piers, and thank you to the IDEAL team for designing this session. It's my great pleasure to serve as your moderator for today for our session on learning from backbone mechanisms to advance HDP coherence. So as Piers said, I'll just give you a little bit of framing for this session. We can move to the next slide. So a little bit of history about backbones. This is not a new term. It's also a term that was first used, or I first came across it in the context of US domestic work on collective action for collective impact. And this was documented in 2011 in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And in that review, documenting collective action for collective impact, they looked at different initiatives from the domestic context. And they highlighted one on improving education within the greater Cincinnati area, and the northern Kentucky in the US. And they looked at the 5 conditions that were necessary to achieve collective impact. And those included having a common agenda, a shared measurement, mutual reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and a backbone support function. This translated into this backbone support function, translated into a separate organization with staff with a very specific set of skills to support the collective of actors on collaboration, coordination, communication. And most recently, the Stanford Innovation Review also highlighted the efforts to center equity at the center, to center equity as a prerequisite to collective impact. That's something we relate to also in our context. So that was 2011. This was documented. This was going on already for quite a while in the US in different domestic contexts. Comes 2011, 2012, and the emergence of the resilience work in the international context. And we see the emergence of backbone support in resilience programming with examples in northern Kenya with the resilience backbone support at the time called Africa Lead that supported 26 plus activities working on resilience. We had the SAREL in the Sahel working on the resilience in the Sahel Enhance RISE 1 to support collective actions there on resilience. Similarly, in Uganda, the Karamoja Resilience Support Unit was also set up. So this was the early efforts of coordination support that inform a second generation of backbone coordination mechanism that you will hear about today. And then earlier this year, under the auspices of the Resilience Leadership Council at USAID, USAID released HDP Coherence Programming Consideration Papers for IPs that flagged the importance of backbone support. On the screen, you will see the definition of HDP Coherence. And it's just nice to ground ourselves in the definition as we dive into this in this session. And our HDP Coherence aim at promoting complementarity of collaboration among humanitarian development and peace actors in the pursuit of a common agenda, with a goal to maximize impact and sustainability of programs across all kinds of assistance to reduce the need for humanitarian assistance over time. So here we also see a lot of the concept that we heard earlier, even in the domestic context, the common agenda, the complementarity, collaboration, maximizing impact. This paper, which I think we'll put in the chat if it's not already there, identifies 7 principles for HDP coherence. And I'll just read quickly through them as our speakers today will touch on them as well as they speak about how their backbone coordination support has been supporting HDP coherence. First one is uphold and respect humanitarian principles. The second one is plan jointly and seek a common agenda. The third is create and strengthen communication, coordination, and learning platforms across different kinds of assistance. The fourth is strategically sequence, layer, and integrate humanitarian development and peace assistance where appropriate. The fifth one is promote shock responsive programming and data-driven adaptive management. The next one is champion conflict integration and opportunities for enabling and building peace where possible. And the last one is ensure programming is with by and through local partners and systems. So these 7 principles, we can already see that they need the type of support that backbone mechanism, collaboration, coordination provide. So in the same paper, USAID recognized that backbone mechanism can play a key role across most of these principles and identify backbones as essential to effectively coordinate programs implemented across different kinds of assistance, sector and places, that they can facilitate collaboration and learning among partners and stakeholders. So as already described, these backbone mechanisms or coordination mechanism are independent entities that support partners in mainstreaming maintaining strategic coherence and facilitate learning, collaboration, coordination in a geographical area. So this session will explore the role of these mechanisms in advancing collective impact for HDP coherence through collaboration, coordination, and joint learning. So let's move on to our next slide. So today we are going to learn from representatives from these 3 mechanisms, and I'll introduce them in alphabetical order. So joining us from Nairobi, we have Jim Flock, who is an agribusiness and humanitarian development professional with over 15 years of experience leading agricultural and humanitarian projects that strengthen collaboration, market systems, and sustainability throughout sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. Currently, he is ACDI VOCA Chief of Party for the USAID Resilience Learning Activity. So welcome, Jim. Next, joining us from Niamey in Niger, we have Alissa Karg-Jura, who works with Mercy Corps as Chief of Party for the USAID Sahel Collaboration and Communication Activity, also known as SCC. Alissa has over 20 years of experience leading design, implementation, and closeout of humanitarian response and economic development programs supported by USAID, the EU, UN agencies, local governments, and the private sector. So welcome, Alissa. And finally, joining us from Kampala, Uganda, we have Mesfin Mola, who works with Tufts University as a Chief of Party for the Karamoja Resilience Support Unit 2 in Uganda. Mesfin has over 20 years of experience in Ethiopia, Sudan, Uganda, and previously worked at ACDI VOCA, Mercy Corps, Farm Africa, Save the Children, ActionAid, and CHF partners. So this is our greatly distinguished and very experienced panel. Before we jump out into discussion with our panel, we wanted to get a sense of who's joined us today in our audience and your relation to backbone mechanism or secretariat coordination mechanism. So you'll see in the chat, I believe, a poll that gives you, or that pulls out, that appears on your screen with 3 options. The first one being my activity project is being supported by a secretariat coordination mechanism or a backbone, as we call it here. The second option is I'm a staff of such backbone. Or my last option is my activity or project is not supported by a coordination mechanism or a backbone. So if you could take just a second or two to let us know where you are in those 3 options, we would really appreciate it. And then the ideal team, if you can let us know when we can see the result or where we can see the result. A few more seconds. All right, so we see the result. I believe we all see them together. And the majority of us are not supported or are not part of a backbone mechanism. We have, so that's 55% of us, and then 41% of us are belonging to backbone mechanism. So we have a lot of representation in the room from backbone. That's wonderful. We'll be able to hear also your experience. And then just a few of us have our activities or projects supported by a backbone mechanism. So that's wonderful to know. This is really great for the panel to kind of have a sense of where you're coming from your introduction, but also what's your relation to backbone mechanism from this poll. So thank you so much for participating in that. So now we'll turn to our panel with the first question. And we'll start with some introduction, and I'll start with Alisa. If you can tell us about your role, SCC, backbone mechanism you're working with, and the type of stakeholders with whom you are working. So I'll turn it over to you, Alisa.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Karine. So again, my name is Alyssa Carg-Girard, and I work on the Sahel collaboration and communication activity. We call it SCC, so I'll probably refer to SCC quite a bit during the discussion. But basically, SCC is designed to promote resilience, collaboration, learning, and adaptation. And while it covers the Sahel, we work primarily in Burkina Faso and Niger. And it's a 5-year CLA activity that is led by a consortium with Mercy Corps as the lead. We work with researchers at Tulane University, work with Equal Access International around communications, and a local organization in Burkina Faso called CGD. And basically, the backbone of SCC is really looking at helping key stakeholders and partners understand resilience as a pathway to achieving development objectives and promoting collaboration. Really looking at learning on resilience, countering violent extremism and development, looking to generate learning, to share learning and apply learning among those projects. And if that happens and results are effectively communicated, then the hope is that there will be better resilience, CVE, and development outcomes. So it's a 5-year project. We're right in the middle of it right now. Our primary stakeholders, folks that we work with, are USAID Resilience Portfolio partners. There are over 30 in both countries, so it's a fairly large group. We work very closely with national resilience institutions in both countries. In Niger, they have what they call, it's the 3N initiative, which is aimed at food security, but also coordinating with all the other partners. In Burkina Faso as well, there's a national coordination mechanism for resilience and food security that we work with. We work with many secondary stakeholders, researchers in both countries, other national development institutions and government bodies, secondary NGO partners. So that would mean the partners of USAID implementers. Many USAID implementers work with national organizations or local NGOs. So those are the other partners that we'd work with. We work with civil society groups as well, listening clubs, local engagement committees, and media. Different national media, radio. And our total reach of direct participants is around 1,500 individuals. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the scope and timing.
Thank you so much, Alisa, for this great overview. Now we'll turn with the same question to Jim. If you can tell us about your role, RLA mechanism, and who you're working with, your stakeholders. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Karine. The RLA programs, it's a little bit different. We have more of a multidimensional approach. The RLA program here in Kenya, it has adopted the resiliency approach of the USAID Kenya mission, which is what's called a 3C strategy, which is the co-creation, co-implementation, and co-monitoring, aligning with the administration's localization strategy, working with local development partners. That engagement works a lot with county officials, aligning USAID partners. As Karina mentioned earlier, we cover as RLA, which is the Resilience Learning Activity, the Partnership for Resilience and Economic Growth, which is PREG, and also the Southeastern Kenya Corridor, which is called SEC. So those are the two acronyms, knowing everyone's probably speaks acronym quite well on this panel. So we work with a lot of service providers that help us align joint work plans between USAID resiliency initiatives and county priorities, essentially aligning to their work plans in terms of maximizing leveraging and in the alignment of HDP principles that's strengthening local systems and actors. So very much having this a localization. Our Somalia program is a little bit different. They work with several consortiums. They work a little bit more with multiple donor coordination activities. A lot of this is focusing on the HDP principles of sequencing, layering, and integration. And so they make sure if someone's working on WASH, someone can look at borehole construction, someone might look at water piping, while another is doing storage containers or water containers or borehole drillings, similar with kind of land access and rights too. But they do it more on a multi-donor platform. I know the goal is kind of to cross-pollinate between the two, where Kenya takes more of their sequencing, layering, and integration, and we take more of their Somalia moving forwards into years 4 and 5. Like Alyssa, we're a 5-year program and currently about to enter year 4. And we also cover the Horn, which is a regional initiative. So the KRSU program, also entities like EGAD, which is a regional non-government actor. And we take the lessons learned from Uganda, Somalia, Ethiopia, some of these best practices, and also, some of the challenges that have faced. And we make sure that gets extrapolated across the region where possible. A lot of these activities and whatnot are covered in what's called the Horn Learning Month, which RLA facilitates in October. So I think with that, we can kick it back over to you, Karine.
Thank you so much, Jim, for this great overview. And then we'll move to Mesfin to hear from him, his role, the Karamoja Resilience Support Unit, and your stakeholders who you're working with. Mesfin.
Thank you so much, Karen. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mesfin Ayela Mola. I'm with Tufts University in Uganda as a chief of party for the Karamoja Resilience Support Unit. The Karamoja Resilience Support Unit is an initiative of USAID Uganda and Tufts University, and showcasing resilience and economic development, also improve efficiency and effectiveness of developmental systems. We started this mechanism back in 2015. We are now in second.
Mesfin, sorry to interrupt you. Could you get closer to your mic? We are getting a little bit of distorted sound, so we want to make sure everybody gets to hear you well.
I'm alone in a room, so it's echoing. What I'm saying is, we started this mechanism back in 2015 and we are in the second phase of the activity. The mechanism works very closely with a group of aid donors and UN agencies. We call them the Karamoja Development Partners Group. And we also work with USAID Uganda mostly with their resilience focus in Karamoja, and also with the Ministry for Karamoja Affairs at the Office of the Prime Minister. This is a dedicated ministry in charge of coordinating development in that region, and also with the district local governments. We work with local universities and research centers as well. And if you look into our activities, we do investigate emerging trends, good practices, and promising strategies. And we support evidence-based approach to policy and programming. Also, our technical support to coordination and learning support at multiple actors level, and also at multiple status. So it involves coordination between the donors themselves. It involves coordination between the donors and governments, and also it involves coordination between the implementing partners on the ground with the district local government. So our support is packaged to support some of these coordination structures at the various levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Masfin, for the overview of the Karamoja Resilience Support Unit and your role and stakeholders. So from those three great introductions, we can see there is a variety of geographic coverage where we have SCC covering 2 countries. We have RLA working in Kenya in 2 specific geographies, and in Somalia and at a regional level, and then in Uganda in a specific region of Karamoja. Then we have different approaches, which some mechanisms are focused on more as a primary audience or primary beneficiaries of the USAID partners, implementing partners in those geography, versus multi-donor multitude of partners that are funded by USAID as well as other donors. In the case of Somalia, in the case of Karamoja in Uganda, as well as multi-donor financing. We heard also from Masfin that the Karamoja Support Unit, Resilience Support Unit, is also co-financed by other donors as well, which is not the case of RLA or SCC, who are solely financed by USAID. So that's a little bit of difference. We also hear commonalities around a common thread. I heard that resilience has been an important focus of the support of the activities you are supporting in the field. And national, local government are at the center, working in each country's supporting the national government, their existing coordination mechanism. We heard about the 3N, we heard about IGAD on the regional level, local government of Kenya as well, and of course the OPM Ministry of Karamoja Affairs in Uganda. So we have like a variety of experience. The functions supporting those programs are pretty similar, with some differences in terms of the Karamoja Resilience Support Unit being maybe less in creating a separate structure for coordination, working through existing coordination mechanism and doing more of the information sharing and the policy work. But those are just my own interpretation of commonalities and differences. I'm sure there is much more in there. So let's jump in with questions to our panelists about how they see their work advancing HDP currents, humanitarian development peace currents, especially in the aspect of coordination. So for this, we'll start with Masfin. Would like to hear from you on this question.
Right, thank you, Karen, again. Let me start with the context. So, it's very important to note that Karamata is a least developed region in Uganda, with a population that is characterized by high levels of poverty, food insecurity, and malnutrition. The region is also known for high level of armed conflict, which has often been associated with raiding of livestock, and it has also cross-border dimensions. So, looking into this, it is clear that the area fits into the HDP concept very well. Although in the KRSU we don't explicitly use the language, the HDP language, in our technical and coordination support, we constantly advise our partners to conduct analysis that fully considers the conflict context and dynamics, and also to design programs that are conflict sensitive. Similarly, we also advise our partners to kind of integrate disaster risk management into long-term development programming. This is a disaster-prone region. So the HDP continent that makes us is clearly seen in the kind of work we do. We have, I can highlight some of the challenges in terms of ensuring the HDP Coherence. The mechanism, the KRSU, has no management control. It is an independent technical unit, so it does not have management control over partners and does not control their funding or other resources. So, although we can provide evidences, or we support learning, or we help coordinate, ultimately it is up to the government or the donors and the NGOs to change their way of things, and also change their capacities, practices, and programs, and ultimately also evaluating these programs. So that is one critical aspect. So you can generate information or you facilitate all that learning, but you don't have control over the utilization of this knowledge. And the other aspect is we have experience.
Masfin, sorry again. Before you continue, can you try to get closer again to your mic?
Oh my gosh, my speaker is really exciting.
Like whichever way you were at the beginning when you did the text check would be wonderful.
Right. Okay. So
that's better.
Okay, fine then. So we have also experienced high turnover of senior staff in donors and NGOs. That was also a challenge. There is a continuous, effort to bring the newcomers up to speed, and that is also another area we would like to share to this group. The other critical factor is, the development peace context in Karamoja is complex and it's dynamic, and the incentive for organizational learning is often unclear. And it varies between organizations and leaders of organizations and stuff like that. So I can mention some examples. For instance, in the conflict issues, there is a clear political economy in play, and some actors which are formally responsible for supporting peace, you see them informally benefiting from conflict. Yeah. That is a kind of sensitivity. So in this situation, we use a mix of activities that support learning while taking account of these political and organizational sensitivities. So that is one aspect. So one other important thing we also focus is ensuring that the community voices are heard. So community voices are a very critical part of our work, and we emphasize on the use of participatory approaches. For example, recently we completed a conflict analysis, and local people described the pros and perpetrators of conflict and the effectiveness of conflict management programs. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mesfin. We'll communicate to you maybe some advice on the mic on the chat for the further question to make sure we can catch you better. We'll move to the same question, hearing from Jim on the experience with RLA in your work in advancing HDP currents. What are you learning, as well as what have been the main challenges?
Yeah, I think to this end, I'll kind of speak in sections, but to the RLA Kenya, I think the challenge, notably working with the county, it's what we do is called the joint work plan. So across the two coordination mechanisms that RLA monitors or manages, the PREG and the SEC, and working with the county officials, it's trying to align everyone to get on the same page in terms of activity planning. So it requires a lot of time investment at the county level and at the IP level to make sure these are aligned. The program itself, there's been an evolution of the joint work plan too, and to adhere to the HDP, it's very much that planning jointly and seeking a common agenda. This year being unique, Kenya has their presidential elections and national elections on Monday. So that this year is unique has been a challenge in terms of rightfully competing interests. And so I think to that point, but it is also in terms of the HDP as well, that local system strengthening in regards to being able to not do a USAID work plan and USAID ACDA Avoca's IP or Mercy Corps' work plan, but to very much make sure our work plans are aligning with the county initiatives and in the county work plans. They're called CIDPs, which is a County Integration Development Plan, but trying to use the language for USAID IPs so it aligns. I think one of the other things that has been a benefit and a challenge, but also is to kind of increase the communication, coordination, and learning across all kinds. But to me, the all kinds has been some of our work with our knowledge management and communications team. And with that, we've engaged with local media in regards to assisting and telling these stories with a community lens to it and to a non-USAID lens to it. So getting them to kind of understand these systems, these processes, to bring them on board and kind of understand the initiatives, but that's also had a very good knock-on effect if they're able to kind of communicate the resiliency programs, the investments, and not only from USAID because of the co-creation and the co-implementation, but in terms of that communication to local actors that, you know, aren't in the county buildings or aren't kind of in the IP office to that. In building onto Mesfin's point on some of the sequencing, layering, integration, the Somalia program has done an excellent job of their work in terms of sequencing, layering across multiple sectors, WASH, construction and land tenure, making sure those activities are captured into that, but also ensuring that they're capturing those messages. They've done some exceptional work in terms of documenting drought response that's prevalent within northeastern Kenya and obviously borders into Somalia and regions of Ethiopia. And they've done a very good job of taking this SLI and mapping it to inform that data for decision-making, informing that, and that extrapolates both to the SLI principles or principle number 4, but also to that communication and coordination principle number 3 in aligning with the HDP. So I think with that, hopefully everyone can hear me okay, but if not, I'm sure I'll see it in the chats. Back over to you,
We
Corinne.
can hear you very well. Maybe just a quick follow-up from me. When you talk about the sequencing, layering, and integration work in Somalia and their really great progress and success in that, what role does RLA plays in regards to that?
It acts as kind of the purveyor of all the donor entities and all the consortia that are going on. I can go on a list of acronyms, but they essentially look at kind of these, I know one was a land tenure and road reconstruction. And some of them are on the call and perhaps can join later to provide even more, but they assisted with land tenure. One entity assisted with like solar panel construction to it. They assisted with that, while another entity, another donor consortium did feeder roads and road reconstruction. So there's access to these new locations. So I think that was kind of a good example of that type of SLI. I know in some WASH examples too, they looked at water piping, they looked at borehole, one entity would look at water piping, one would look at borehole construction, and then one would look at the actual, hygiene and sanitation principles in terms of hand washing and kind of preventative measures for, disease and contamination, obviously very much relevant to the COVID time period as well too.
Yeah.
So
RLA plays like kind of this platform for those activities to come together?
Yes, to use the same language, they are the backbone support to make sure that coordination. And so it's not just one entity just doing borehole after borehole, but there is a layering attachment. So one invests their resources to one specific initiative. And so for land tenure, I thought that was good where they were providing those land tenure and those housing relocations, but then another entity was providing roads to make sure that there was market access and there was ways to access these new construction sites for IDPs being established and set up.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
All right, so now moving on to Alisa on the work of SCC in advancing HDP Currents. If you can share with us what you've learned, what have been the challenges, and your specific role as SCC supporting HDP. Thank you.
Sure. I think we're all working in areas that are becoming increasingly complex. The Sahel is not alone. It's a region that's very, very dynamic. It's also a region where there are protracted food and nutrition crises for a long time. There's growing insecurity, regional issues, and pretty major geopolitical shifts. There just is a lot going on here. And that means that there are a lot of new actors coming in all the time, involved in different parts of HDP. For example, SCC did an analysis sort of on the triple nexus, is the way that we refer to it here in Niger and Burkina. Just trying to kind of track and scope who's doing what. And just for example, in Niger, there were 5 different national institutions who said it was their role to be, leading HDP. That means that there are multiple donors who fund those activities kind of differently, separately, and they all have their own bilateral coordination mechanisms. There are other multilateral coordination mechanisms. There are just a lot of people involved and a lot of organizations involved, and it's shifting all the time because of the nature of this work and how increasing risks and increasing needs in the Sahel. So it makes it a really complex working environment. And so there are challenges among all those new actors. Everyone has to understand the context to come on board. They have different ways of working as well. The example that I always give is, we have a meeting with different NGO partners, even USAID NGO partners, and there are obvious issues about humanitarian access and neutrality, and the way that some development actors, some NGOs, because they work so closely with the government, they have to follow their policies and rules related to escorts. Humanitarian actors, they can't work with armed escorts. It's a very, very different challenge, unique challenge to places where we work, where that's happening at the same time. Other issues are related to, programmatic approaches. Because of how quickly things have changed in the Sahel, there was a large portfolio of resilience activities, but primarily, let's say, long-term development investments of the US government in both countries. And then conflict came into those same zones. And so there are a need to very quickly to respond to humanitarian needs, while there are really market-oriented programs that are already in place. And so imagine there's a food distribution that's planned in a community who is doing warehouse financing and market access. It's really complex, and stakeholders don't necessarily see eye to eye on those things. So I think some of the ways that SCC has looked at these multiple challenges is really just trying to talk about information and communication and coordinating of information. So we have a knowledge management platform that's open to USAID development implementers, anyone in the HDP. There are relief actors who access it, others, just to get the information out there. So for example, we help share briefs, studies, documentation about emerging lessons from different activities. We try to do work, we've done some shock calendars, so to try to get people to understand what are major recurring shocks in the region. We do a lot of mapping as well, trying to show who does what where, how that overlays with security information, just so people have access to information that they need to be able to coordinate better. And then we also try to do to convene some coordination. There are field-based coordination activities that we do, and we try to work with USAID partners in a given region to do some joint action planning, so that there is the possibility for sequencing, layering, and integration of those activities. And even though we're one of the projects that works primarily with USAID partners and stakeholders, but we've tried to help USAID as well convene discussions on HDP coordination among the USAID portfolio, and have also worked with partners to try to discuss conflict adaptation among implementing partners, what they're learning, to try to share those lessons and how they might be applied by others to adapt to a really, really rapidly changing environment. So those are just a few examples. I mean, we do other things. There are other learning activities and research activities, but those are some of the key challenges and a couple of ways that we try to help out.
Thank you, Alyssa. Yeah, what I hear is, being a forum for activities to come together and discuss these challenges and look at opportunities for collaboration, where possible is important role of your backbone mechanisms. I heard also talking about new actors coming in, and I recall from my time that came from you, Alyssa, and I recall from my time spent in Kenya working with RLA, and I was really impressed of the onboarding structure or process that you have. I hope you still have it, because I remember it really being a great way to get new partners up to speed into knowing the collective. And I don't know if, James, you want to share something on that?
No, I think to that, very much kind of what RLA has done, and a credit to our knowledge management and communications team, is we still do that onboarding and offboarding. We have, one of our goals is we do have what is a preg manual, but I think even going to Alyssa's point, the manuals don't work because there's so many different entities that are so many prescriptive to their rules and regs. But ideally, these guidelines moving forward, and I think even taking that a step further, is that also when we look at the joint work planning and we look at some of the knowledge management and implications work, one of the things we also know too is trying to align, and this will be a big goal for us this year, is indicators. So, the hypothesis or the theory is that county indicators and these activities, each entity has to report on them. And so getting them to speak respectively the same reporting language. So it helps them harmonize that to people that they have to report up to, or who might not be familiar with backbone or coordination entities, to get them speaking a little bit more of the same language. But yes, to your point, and to that, very much in terms of onboarding and a lot of work we've done in the last year and a half, also with offboarding to assist with that repository as institutional management as a backbone support in a coordination, but also for the Kenya side, also exploring these activities to kind of take it forward in regards to standalone repositories that would live outside the life of a USAID program activity. I'll kick it back over. Yeah, jumped in there a little bit.
Thank you. Great, thank you so much. There's so much experience in what the three of you are sharing. So now we'll move a little bit to the following question on Yes, we've heard from your work with different level of stakeholders. We've heard also from Masfin on the multiple, the multiple donor configuration that is working in Karamoja. Now, we'll just like to move to Alisa to give us some example on how you're trying to coordinate among stakeholders for increased HDP coherence and the approaches you take.
Sure. Let me maybe just give a practical example. So one of the things that we do is we convene thematic roundtable discussions. So to try to take a bit more of a deep dive on thematic or technical issues, and those are often by sector. So for example, we co-convene with the National Early Warning System in both countries, a disaster risk reduction thematic roundtable session. And so that involves members of the total local system of responding to and adapting to disaster risks. So that's with the early warning system, with USAID implementing partners and other stakeholders. Of course, we do invite others as well to participate in that. And those sessions usually involve context monitoring. We kind of say, what are you seeing emerging in the regions that you're working? How is that making you shift and adapt? What kind of responses are you implementing? And try to get to have basically a working plan to lead through really almost every session, kind of a review of those, and try to make those relationships, introduce the discussion to try to get implementers to start talking about what they can maybe do together. So we've been able to come up with partners some joint strategies around contingency, different contingencies, operating contingencies, and some emergency response. Several of the partners that are funded by the USAID in both countries have a crisis modifier. So there's often a lot of support to coordination around that, how to implement a crisis modifier. We've done some presentations on them just so that all partners know what the mechanism is and how they can use it. But just try to make sure that that's coordinated where we can. Another thing that we do with the disaster risk reduction group is we also at SCC try to participate in other coordination. I think everyone knows everyone is super busy. All implementing partners just don't have the time to do all the coordination that really is needed. I just mentioned all of the different actors who are working in it. Folks just don't have the time to do every meeting. And so we try to participate in some of those mechanisms as well and be able to report back to members of the USAID group to be able to find out what's going on with other actors. So that's another thing that we do. So maybe I'll just talk a little bit about what we think has worked pretty well in that, and what are some of the ways that and the factors that it has helped that happen. I would say that what's worked well is really the relationship building and having processes and some tools for partners to help them resolve their challenges. It really is for us, a backbone has to meet the needs of the implementing partners. If we're not meeting their needs, if they don't have a vested interest in the success of a backbone, it won't really work. And so we have to understand their interest in collaboration, sequencing, and layering. So I think the things that have made that successful and have helped with that have really been USAID's role in communicating clear expectations for partners, the expectation that the portfolio will work together cohesively, coherently. Another thing is really SCC has made a concerted and intentional effort to promote community building. For example, we have an RCLA fellowship that is it's a 3-month really intensive cohort to share skills, have a shared language about resilience and CLA mechanisms, tools, approaches that partners can apply in their own activities. And also really to kind of break the barriers that everyone knows about. There's competition, there are different ways of working, just really to try to get a cohort of people who share language and want to work together moving forward. So we've done that really intentionally. I think another thing for us is that we've got some evidence, there are partners are saying that there are proven operating efficiencies by working in this way. We have examples, I think James mentioned that just a little bit ago there. We have other examples of that where, one partner is doing wells, and another partner said, well, then we'll train the well mechanics. And another partner who is working on financing to sustain the well committee, to do the equivalent of a tax collection that's managed by the commune to make sure that that happens. Those things, partners are saying that it's really just saved us time. A new partner coming in says, oh, well, we already have the, this is French, this is Franglais, the bid documents, the DAO for doing well construction. And that's a great help because no one has to reinvent the wheel. So we're hearing that that's something that that partners appreciate. And I think the other thing is that we also collect data at SCC about how partners are applying learning and what kind of results or outcomes that they might have as a result of that application. So we're pretty intentional about that and try to hear from them what is the way that we're working with them that they like, what they don't like, to try to get regular feedback and make adjustments as we go along. For this specific case, I think of the DRR, the disaster risk reduction group, the fact that we did provide support to help them do their, some of their contingency plans that were a requirement from USAID to put those in place that helped them already. There's a lot of goodwill, SCC really tries to provide technical services to partners when they ask, when they need them. We try to be responsive to them. And I think that helps us maintain those relationships that are necessary for collaboration to happen. I guess the other thing that I would just say is that the disaster risk reduction group has been successful is just on the basis of these collaboration frameworks as well with the national governments. The way that this is designed is really to help them meet their needs for collaboration among USAID partners. And I think in the same way that it saves time for the implementing partners, I think it saves time for them too. Because we can be one actor that approaches them on behalf of USAID partners to talk about some of these issues. So I'm going to just stop there.
Thank you, Alyssa. There was a lot in there, a lot of very great inputs, and I've put some notes that we can pick up later. I want to make sure we have we give the floor to our other panelists. We'll move on to Jim with the same question, Jim.
Yeah, it's tough act to follow with Alyssa and all the work they're doing. So we'll try and dive in as well. I think to build on that point, one of the things in regards to the HDP coherence, which has been prevalent, has been some of the shock responsive and adaptive programs. And that stems from the coordination work we've done under the joint work planning. This is primarily related to the northeastern Kenya, which has been suffering the worst drought in the last 40 years. And so what RLA has done in that regard is, again, act as that coordination mechanism to understand those that are doing cash transfers, those that are doing livestock in terms of looking at feeder or substitute for feed that might not be available, and trying to get those resources committed to those areas while providing that internal kind of relationship role with USAID to say who's doing what where, and also again to the Kenyan elections that, and Somalia had elections earlier this year as well, that political tint is to how that is kind of influencing and kind of making those things available to the communities at large, but also to the county. And so as much as possible that it's coming from kind of a singular prescriptive voice or responsive voice to that. And so I think to that, one of the other things we had learned in regards to that, and specifically stay on the drought, we work with the National Disaster Management Agency, which is a Kenyan national entity. And in the southeastern portion of the country, we had already started doing radio programs with them, and we'll extrapolate that into the northeastern Prague area as well too. And what we had known through kind of this coordination and these feedback mechanisms is the NDMA reports are designed for more higher technical level or higher technical understanding. And what we've started doing in the last few months in response to drought was actually working with local university students to kind of translate this into indigenous languages, into local community languages. So as others are doing cash transfer in this, we're making sure that these messages that are coming from the national entities that have the respect of the constituents, even though sometimes they might not understand, and we're making sure that information is digestible. And some of that also will move into that kind of local media work that we're doing as well too, knowing sometimes we can get lost in our own languages in some of these type of coordination roles. So being very deliberate on how we communicate that, not just internally, but how we extrapolate that information to at the community levels as well too. And some of this aligning with the HDP very much goes into strengthening local systems and actors that shock responsive and adaptive management. And so it is kind of using these things, which I take as day to day, but being deliberate in regards to being prescriptive to kind of those the HDP roles to that as well too. And I think to that point, I think I'll stop there at this point. I don't know. I'll stop there and give it back over to you, Corinne.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, James. Also, like Alyssa, very concrete examples of what you're doing as RLA to support the coordination and contribute to a number of the 7 principles that were identified by USAID, together with something I didn't mention. This paper was developed with large consultation, many consultation with IPs as well. So I'll turn it to Mesfin to hear from the experience in Karamoja with the Karamoja Resilience Support Unit. Mesfin, over to you.
Can you hear me better now? Is it okay now?
I think that's much better.
Oh, really? Okay. So yeah, I saw a question in the text. The Karamoja Resilience Support Unit is primarily funded by USAID, but other donors also contributing to the pool. For instance, this time it's the Irish Aid are contributing to the Karamoja Resilience Support activity. In the past, we also received funding from UK Aid. So it is initiated by USAID, and funded by USAID, but also other donors also are contributing.
Mesfin, stay where you were at the beginning, because it looks like you're getting further away.
Maybe it's the video. Can I switch off the video, because I have a very bad connectivity, as I said earlier. Can I turn off the video on side? How is it now?
Try again. Yeah, I think it's good. Go ahead.
Okay, so back to this question, how we have stakeholders in terms of increased HDP coherence. As I indicated in my earlier responses, we don't have a direct control on the funding of this development and these actors in the region. But we use a coordination approach that tries to create incentives for people and organizations to come together, share information, and also think critically about their programming and its impact on people's livelihoods and security. One thing we do is we avoid doing research for the sake of it, and we jointly develop or identify learning topics with stakeholders, including the donors. And interestingly, the priority list of learning agenda, these stakeholders identified fall into the HDP framework, if you like. We did studies on nutrition, we did studies on disaster risk management capabilities, capacities, and all that stuff. We also did on the economic development side, the livestock economics analysis. We did also market studies, and that is on the long term. Also, we do education studies and access to education and stuff like that. And not only that, we also do conflict analysis. So, the kind of priorities we say fall into this HDP category. So, what we have learned from this is, if people are involved in setting the learning priorities, okay, we find that they are more likely to be interested in the process and take action when they can. So I think that's a very important aspect of this. And one concrete example I would like again to share on the HDP side is we were tasked by the donors group, the Karamoja Development Partners Group, to assist the Ministry for Karamoja Affairs to develop their 5-year strategy. So through a series of consultation and facilitated processes, this plan has clearly reflected the HDP concept. As I said, it has disaster risk management and resilience component clearly outlined. It has economic development and infrastructure development aspects included in their strategic objectives, and also peace and security is also part of that plan. One important aspect of this plan is this plan serves as a framework of the region. Whoever is intervening in the region needs to align their investment along these priorities and this plan. So it helps us as a framework for intervention or investment in the region. So with that, I believe the HDP coherence can be achieved. One other aspect I want also to highlight is the importance of issues coming from the actors themselves. On the conflict analysis we just concluded, it was a group of actors. They are called the Karamoja peace actors, who identified, who reviewed whatever knowledge available on conflict and security issues in Karamoja, and they asked us to focus on key gaps in knowledge, and including some of these questions include some sensitive political economic questions. So we looked into that. Once we have the key topics and questions and everything ready, we developed an approach for assessment that focused on community voices, as this element has previously been missing. So these are the kind of, it comes from the stakeholders, and we take it and also we fill in gaps. We don't reinvent the wheel. Maybe to just highlight specific stuff, general ways of working that we use in this kind of coordination. I think for this kind of backbone support to succeed. There needs to be a clear terms of reference for the coordination mechanism with clear objectives and plan of actions for a particular period. That's very, very critical. This is reviewed annually, and they review their progresses and update their plan. So that is the same applies for the other sector coordinations we support. And the other thing is, I've said already, clear learning agenda set for a particular period. So it's updated every year, and of course with flexibility to accommodate ad hoc, demands, and that is also one aspect. And the other thing is making these coordination platforms more lively. So we integrate current and relevant evidence into kind of technical discussion in the regular coordination meetings. So it's not just a meeting agenda exchange of information, but also very substantive technical discussion on current and relevant issues. The other aspect is maintaining strong working relations with all actors. We keep them informed, stay in contact with all, and with updates and stuff like that. Particularly due to high staff turnover, we, our team is on standby to keep everyone up to speed to this. And another important aspect we found for the KSS is maintaining objectivity and balance. So this is possible because we are not implementing partners, we don't implement projects, so we don't have a particular program sector or approach to promote. So, so that kind of trust and confidence is really critical for this kind of backbone. And also another aspect is ensuring good knowledge management. For instance, through our website, we have online library of documents on Karamoja, not only the kind of reports we produce, but also other current research, evaluations, reviews, and assessment reports that are available in our website. So that knowledge management aspect is also critical for this kind of platform to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mesfin. We've heard so much from and with all range of work that Backbone Support are doing between supporting the Ministry of Karamoja Affairs, developing a strategic plan for 5 years, all the way to working at the village, at the commune level on practical borehole. So there's such a richness of everything in between that you're doing. Now we're coming to the last question, and we are running short on time. So I'll put it to each of the panelists to think of, like, what are some key recommendations that are practical for IPs from your experience on this. So try to keep it like to the minute if you can. I will start with you, Jim.
I think, to me, just kind of one of the things, and we talked about it earlier, was that for the backbones, think of them as ways to help with onboarding and offboarding. But also, I mean, USAID, we use terms like CLA and SLI. These aren't necessarily standalone initiatives. The backbone is there to help you leverage the principles that come out of the 7 HDP ones, or the 13, principles of CLA. So they're there to provide that, to be kind of an emulsifier, to be an amplifier of these activities. And we're not there to steal anybody's thunder. We're there to enforce that. And to the other 2 points of the panelist is, there's also not a cookie cutter approach. And so as people have different roles and responsibilities, not one coordination program will be similar to the next one. To be open-minded and bring those recommendations to the platform so we can continue to evolve these that are more prescriptive to what is needed, either at the regional or at the host country level. And so hopefully that's right at about a minute. So I'll kick it back over to you.
Yes, well done. Thanks, Jim. We'll move to Mesfin. I think Mesfin, you started to give us your recommendation, but we'll give you the floor for also a minute to give you your top ones for IPs.
That's right, Kyle. Yeah, I started listing out some recommendations already, but I would emphasize on two things. Objectivity and independence of the backbone mechanism is very crucial in terms of strong coordination, collaboration in learning, and getting the trust and confidence of the stakeholders on the backbone mechanism is important. That is also should be in the list of things that to watch when you do coordination. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mesfin. And Alisa?
I'm going to say two things. I know that a lot of people on this call today are from organizations who don't work with a backbone at all. But I think, we all work in dynamic environments. And if I have to say one recommendation for everyone who doesn't work with a backbone, it's really just to continue to look at systems, analyses, and maps and question your hypotheses, because it's a dynamic world where things are changing. It's just important to keep that in mind. For those who work with backbones and who are working on sequencing, layering, and integration, it's about communication. It's really bringing your best soft skills, I think, to the table, because they're challenging issues and people don't see eye to eye. So you just have to be really open, really listen, really try to seek to learn about other people's perspectives. And then just share what's working and what's not. I think there's in the NGO community, there's a fine line balancing rigor with what you just need to know really quickly to make shifts quickly. And I think, I just encourage people to be open and share that information freely to be able to let other people help you make decisions about adaptation. So those would be the points I would share.
Thank you, Alisa. Thank you all for all your great recommendations. Maybe I'll, as we let folks put their questions in the chat from the audience, so we can go to them. I just had a couple of reflections from what you've shared with us. What I heard is, although you may not have used the term, but what translated to me from your work is building trust as an essential part of what you do. And we know that building trust among partners takes time. We work in contexts where partners are competing for resources, and we through this joint collective effort, we shift gears. We ask to shift gears and work as partners contributing towards a common goals, a common agenda. And so this requires time. This requires different set of skills, which I think you bring on board. And what I also heard is being responsive to the needs of stakeholders and IPs. We heard from Mesfin on hearing, learning questions, priorities. And we heard from also Jim and Alisa from hearing from your stakeholders, IPs, what they need, and really being demand driven. I also heard from I can't remember who, but how I think it was Alisa giving that how USAID needs to really give a clear message of this collaboration among partners for delivering on the common agenda, be a clear message from USAID. And that's something I've also seen and experienced in different contexts, how the USA, on the USAID side, there need to be a strong engagement of the AORs, the CORs, to make this work, because as much as you as a backbone mechanism are here to support coordination, collaboration. Alisa shared like helping IPs, like covering some coordination meeting to save them time. The IPs themselves and stakeholders really need to engage, and that takes time. They need to engage in your forums. They need to also, as you look at collaboration, coordination, in like investing in sequencing, layering, integrating, they need to spend time themselves working with other IPs. So those are common of some of my reflection that I wanted to share before we jump into questions from the audience. And I don't know, maybe I'll give space to our panelists to react to any of that as I pull that from your experiences as well as some of mine.
I can jump in real quick. I think to the one point, I've been with RLA for about a year. I've been with ACDA Avoca for about 15 and have worked multiple projects. I do think in terms of one of my experiences over the last year is there was a lot of learning. There was also a lot of explaining as to what these, backbone secretariat programs are here to do. And even that knowledge management, that repository, it's, some of it can get tied into a budget, but a lot of it I've even come to sincerely appreciate from the team is that exhaustive effort to make sure that you're listening and that, again, you're kind of going in this role to be an amplifier. Messman had said earlier, like, we're impartial, but obviously we want our end result is to build resilience and to build communities of practice that empower people, empower the communities, and empower the entities that we're working with, be it county government, be it multi-donors, but ultimately these are supposed to support that. And so I think to that and aligning with this, that communication, coordination, and learning, but also realizing, because sometimes there might be, for those that haven't worked with these, there's this fear of like, why is this program here? And really it's to communicate, like we're here to support, we're here to act as this knowledge management. We're here to help you onboard for questions that you might not have. And to help, we are not USAID, we don't represent the ORs, we don't represent the contracts, but we're here to make everyone's job as easier because they're all very challenging. And so for us, a lot of it on the Kenya side goes into the local systems and working a lot with the county government to make sure all activities align with county priorities, and those get vetted through assemblies and those procedures to go into policy, into law. And then on the Somalia side, it's to make sure that there's no redundancy of resources and we're as much as possible being efficient in that. So I'll just add my 2 cents to that point as well.
Thank you so much, Jim. Alisa, Mesfin, did you want to react as well?
You're on mute, Alyssa. It looks like you were talking.
No, we can go ahead and go forward. I was nodding and smiling because I'm hearing a lot of the same things and thinking a lot of the same things.
All right. Mesfin, did you want to add anything?
Right, maybe a little bit building trust and confidence among the participants is a very critical challenge. You are right. Actually, our trust is trust and confidence on the mechanism itself. Your ability to provide the technical support necessary to the group. In terms of the quality of products you develop. It could be a learning product, it could be a policy brief, or it could be an evidence brief, and kind of to the point and helpful to the challenges at hand. So that kind of thing helps build the confidence on the mechanism, the backbone mechanism. One of the reasons for the other donors to put more funding into the KRSU was, I believe, was because they trusted the ability of Tufts University to provide the technical support to their needs. So that's what I wanted to emphasize.
Thank you, Mesfin. we have a couple of questions that we can address now. One of the questions we have from the chat from Eric was related to a challenge that was heard yesterday in the prior panel around power dynamics among stakeholders. And the need to engage separately political and technical offices within local government. That was the particular example shared yesterday. So in your engagement, especially around joint work planning, how are you navigating this power dynamic, and do you have any lessons learned regarding that? And I think this is this we can address to the full panel, because you all have experience with that. So anyone wants to jump in?
I can, with the joint work planning, I think I can jump in first, if that's okay, because it's kind of one of our signature initiatives. But to that, I think there's been an evolution. The first time we tried doing this, it was during COVID, and so doing that virtually was very difficult. And then the next year we had worked more with consultants that had a lot of understanding of county politics and county understanding. We've since evolved that very much to go to local systems and actors, and we've worked with local entities, taking our own institutional memory and having them work with county officials. So our local service providers are all based into these counties. They have a deeper understanding, and they have those relationships that, you know, our staff is developed and had existing prior to RLA, but we found that to be opening more doors into being a more collaborative effort. And to me, while they represent RLA and they represent the mission at large, they very much represent the community voice, and they have a better lens to see the focus on this and to provide some of those feedbacks moving forward. So to me, with the current administration that is promoting that localization, in terms of the coordination and the backbone role, having these local entities being that representative that are very much based there has been very much something that we've learned as we've kind of gone through this process moving forward, and has given us some of those relationships across the 9 counties that we work with. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jim. Alisa, Mesfin, do you want to react to this question around power dynamics?
Right. Let me start with one example of this, the Karamoja integrated development planning processes. In the past, you know, there are these complaints about the inclusiveness of this planning process, and we noted that in this time around, and so we went to series of consultative process. It's kind of a bottom-up process, not only involving or taking the community perspectives, but also implementers on the ground and also the donors. So different perspectives are put together, and then we created a space for district local governance and community representatives to validate the plan. And so with that, at least their voices are represented as Jim was saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Mesfin. Alisa, did you have anything to add to this question?
No, thanks.
All right, thank you all. I think we had a specific question in the chat around for Jim around the Horn Learning event. If you can just say a little bit more about that, or who sets the agenda? How do you give voice to stakeholders?
So the Horn Learning event, and stay tuned. I have a feeling the listservs for IDEAL and RLA are very aligned. The Horn Learning event, it's obviously covers regional East Africa, but what it does is it takes specific topics, notably kind of what's happened within the last year. It's an annual event, so we will look at, climate smart, drought response. We'll also look at kind of the impact of coordination and best practices, but this isn't just a USAID lens. EGAD, which I had mentioned earlier, is a regional entity. National drought agencies have been representative to talk about how they communicate with communities or within the national entities. Governors, keynote, host country national representatives. And so I think some of the topics we're looking at for this year, and they're still to be defined within the next 2 weeks, but are looking at pro-poor market systems, the impact of investment and both the social and economic economies that benefit from livestock markets, looking at, as had been mentioned earlier, the importance of crisis modifiers and what that has led to under the CLA purview of adaptive management. We're hoping to do an in-person or a blended event. It likely will be the third week in October, but it very much fleshes out, very much the 7 principles of the HDP. It looks at even some of the market systems work. It looks very much at the resiliency work, and it's cross-cutting. The resiliency coordinators across the region provide their input. RLA provides inputs. We seek input from other IPs. So for those that are listening on the call, if there's topics, and usually because of the time differences, we also get to people in from BHADC or some of the other entities into that. And we look at these topics, and then we have experts, not just from the USAID, but from a regional, from country, from other entities, other donors, present on these initiatives as well too. And very much align with HDP, align with CLA, align with SLI as part of the HDP. So it's a really good recap of the activities and what has worked and what has not, and particularly for the Horn this year, covering Somalia, parts of Ethiopia, northeastern Kenya, Uganda. There's been elections and some of the conflict obviously has come to that, but drought has been a major factor affecting the region this year as well. So that will have a heavy focus. Sorry, I talked fast, so hopefully I captured most of that.
Yeah, I think we would have heard from our translators if it was too fast. Hopefully on the French channel, this is all good. I think we're getting close, unless there is more like activity on the chat from our participant, any burning like questions that that you want to take a chance to speak to G, Melissa, and Mesfin. This is a real privilege to have the 3 of you on the call for an extended amount of time. This is really the time. So please do drop your questions if you have any. I think we have heard of you really extensive experience, lessons from your different contexts, your work, working with different stakeholders on how backbone mechanism can support HDP coherence. And I was just looking back at the 7 principles that we spoke about earlier, and I'm so glad that the USAID paper really identified backbone coordination mechanism as being essential to support this work. And I think we heard also from you from specific examples of the different functions that your mechanism do in supporting IP stakeholders, local governments, national governments, in advancing some aspect of HDP coherence. And I think that was the objective of this session, to give folks or IPs participating in concrete examples, your lessons learned, also understanding how the context evolved in each of the countries you're operating in. And so, yeah, I think it's been a really rich a really rich conversation and a really with a lot of learning. So I think we'll move to just some chance for each of our panelists to give us like your last words before we hand it over to our host. Whoever would like to start, Mesfin, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would like to say thank you for organizing this event, an opportunity for us to share what we have learned through these mechanisms, and I would expect more of a similar opportunities in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mesfin. Alisa?
Well, I just appreciated learning from the other panelists. I didn't know about other resilience and CLA initiatives. I think that was one of the first discussions that I had with Pierce and Eric when they were setting this up, saying, what are the other, what are you hearing from the other backbones about how that's working, what you're learning? And I said, I don't know anyone who works on another backbone. So now I know people. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Alisa. And Jim?
Yeah, I think to echo Alyssa's, I've worked with Mesfin a little bit more regionally, but to get the different dynamics and to kind of hear kind of what the other programs are going for and how they're approaching it. I have the benefit also of Somalia, so it's good to have sisters and brothers in arms that we keep doing this. And I think to that point, I think one of the things that RLA will take as part of that East Africa and Horn is one of the things we're looking to do as part of our CLA and part of the mapping is to do a network map analysis of some of the Secretariat programs that also continues to further highlight how they can be effective and that there's not, again, these type of cookie cutter approaches. So it provides more information in terms of data for decision making, so be it, but using some of this information to see, highlight best practices, but also just to demonstrate that these aren't one size fits all, and picking those lessons learned, like I've done from Mesfin, Alyssa, and you, Corinne, over this time period to further amplify how these mechanisms can work. All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the three of you. And I'll turn it over to Pierce now to our host, the host of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corinne. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you, Alyssa, Jim, and Mesfin. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. I particularly appreciated the acknowledgement that this is not easy work and that there's a lot of soft skills, as Alyssa put it, involved. And Mesfin talked about the challenge of being responsible for reporting on a lot of stuff, but not having necessarily the management control over different partners. So it is a challenging but essential role that these mechanisms are playing to build that trust, as all three panelists emphasized, and that openness and that communication. So thank you very much for that. We're almost at time, but before we let you go, we promised we would provide some links to learn more about the backbone mechanisms you heard from today. So we will be posting those. We are posting those in the chat right now. And I would also like to invite our panelists, if people who are on the call would like to reach out to you, how can they do that? If you feel comfortable, whether it's a Twitter handle or a link on LinkedIn or your email address, if they want to reach out to follow up with you, how might they do that? So, as a closing reminder, this event was the second session for the thematic area on communication and coordination for HDP Coherence. Later this month, we hope you'll join us for the last thematic area on sequencing, layering, and integrating humanitarian development and peace assistance. We heard that come up a number of times today. Registration is open for these sessions as well, so you can find the link to that in the chat as well. Finally, We obviously would like to hear your thoughts on this session so that we can improve it for future events. We're going to share a short survey in the chat. It will take less than 2 minutes to complete. And we will keep the Zoom meeting open, play some quiet music in the background as you complete the survey. So thank you again to Karine and to Jim and to Alyssa and Mesfin, and thank you to all of you. And we appreciate you joining us, and we hope to see you soon.